Sean, it's really good to meet you. I want to welcome you to our podcast. I'm excited about your new book, Hating Women. I'll just hold it up briefly. Hating Women: A Memoir of Male Rage and Recovery. And before we get into the details of the book, I like to ask all the people I interview a little bit about your own origin story. How did you get into journalism, which is your background in writing, and then how did you come to write this book?
Mm. Yeah, I always loved writing. That was kind of like, as a really shy boy, that was sort of the way that I communicated and the way that I felt like I could get my ideas down. So, I was always a writer. Um, and I kind of came into journalism a little bit through the back door. I was living in New York City and I was kind of bouncing around and I was having some trouble. It was, right after my dad had passed away. So I was a bit listless and I was kind of like looking for what might be my next thing. And I started a blog while I was working at a job in commercial real estate, and the blog started to get a little bit of traction. And it was about fashion, so some of the fashion companies started to pick it up, and then I ended up getting a job at GQ, and that was my first journalism job. And um, yeah, it was great. I mean, I got to learn from some amazing editors there and some amazing guys that I met through that industry there. So that was my door that opened.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us a little bit about how you came to write this book, because it's a very unique and I think powerful book, and I think it's really going to make a difference in the world of men and relationships. So give a little, yeah, just quick overview of kind of how the book came to be, and then we'll kind of get into more detail with it.
Sure, yeah. A journalist who I love, who was like one of my favorite journalists for men's magazines when I was coming up in that industry, a guy named Tom Junot. He actually just had a book come out. He says, like, so much of my writing has been about something that was bothering me. And so I think the way I came to write this book is my relationship to women was really bothering me. So that was that it was something that I just couldn't seem to unsee in my life. And I started to get curious about, hey, what are the origins of this for me? My personal origins of this, because we all have our own origins for why relationships might be tricky for us, right? Or where our blind spots might be. But yeah, I was just bothered by it.
Yeah. Well, as that's true of many men, as you say. It was true in my life. People who visit my website at Men Alive see my intro video of Confessions of a Twice Divorced Marriage Counselor, and I've been very open in sharing my own history and process. So, in terms of your writing and what you've come to see, you really the book goes into some great depth about your relationships and the struggles you've had, and how did things begin to shift for you when you were able, because so many men deny these issues, they don't deal with them, they just wreck our relationships and we go on to the next thing, or we deal with it in other ways in our lives. So how did things start to shift for you?
I think the real mirror moment for me was a particular breakup that I had in the early part of 2015, which I go into in the book. And, it was the fallout from it was so harrowing for me. It really led me down this path of being suicidal and like really looking at, oh my God, like I'm kind of facing this similar situation that my dad faced and actually, succumbed to. So that was kind of my mirror moment is like, wow, I'm going down the same path as my dad, and I don't want to go down that path because that ends in a I don't want to be out of here, you
Yeah,
know? So that moment was like, wow, like if I'm going through these breakups and something really, really gnarly is happening within me. I really gotta look at that. I
yeah.
gotta, I gotta, this will be a connection for you too. The first book that I found that really started to steer me in the direction of looking inward and specifically looking at my relationships to women was by John Lee, The Flying Boy. And I read John's book. Actually, my mother gave me that book. I went to visit my mother and my stepfather, and like you, they have a big wall of books in their study. And they're all like recovery books because they're all from the recovery communities of the 80s and 90s, right? So they have all these recovery books, and I just felt gravitated towards this one book.
Yeah, that's super. As you know, I've known John for many years. I had written my first book in 1983, Inside Out, Becoming My Own Man, where I, talked about that. And then I heard about John's book, and we became friends and colleagues, have taught various places. So, I think many of us grew up in homes, I certainly did, where my father was absent.
Hmm.
A little bit about my story is, my dad, when I was 5 years old, took an overdose of sleeping pills and, felt that he just couldn't go on. He felt like he couldn't support his family
Hmm.
during doing the work he loved. And he didn't die, fortunately. He ended up in a mental hospital, and, my life was never the same. Your dad actually died, and that had to be, totally devastating. I mean, it was hard enough many of us with distant or absent dads.
Hmm.
Say a little bit about how that impacted you and how, the father loss or the father disconnection has impacted you and how that, plays itself out in our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I- it wasn't until like many years after my dad had passed that I had kind of looked back and I realized that because again, my dad was physically present in my childhood, like like you said. So it was a little harder to see for me like where those absences began. Um, but yeah, my dad's death was really, really hard on me. My dad was like my favorite person in the world. So to lose him, especially at that pivotal time for me, I was like 21, 22 years old. I was coming out of college. I was a senior in college actually. And so to lose him was just, I mean, it spun me out, honestly. I was already like well on my way to a pretty prodigious drug addiction at that point, but that really threw me into the deep end. And I spent the next 4 years just kind of reeling and then when I finally came out of that and started to get my stuff together, I went to rehab and did a bunch of other things that kind of got me on a better track. But yeah, it just became this long process of peeling apart that loss, all the little nuances of that loss of not having a father and a mirror in an older man, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a book, one of my books. I've written 17 books so far, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the books was called Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of captures, where I was at the time and where so many other, men and women are that are looking for love in the wrong places but don't recognize. So I discovered, as did you, also as I began over many, many years to peel back the wounds and to see the connection between the past, which
Mm-hmm.
I, like you, just assume, well, it's just what happened. Things happen, and I only slowly recognized how these things stay alive in our subconscious till we deal with them. And
Totally.
you also talk, as I did, about my mother wound, because we often have wounds from both sides, no matter what
Mm-hmm.
kind of parent relationship we have. So, talk a little bit about, the things you started to get into with understanding better your relationship with your mother and how that's impacted your relationships in your adult life now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my dad was such an obvious place to look for me with losing him to suicide. So, man, the first many years of my life were spent looking, or sorry, the first many years of my recovery were spent looking at him. But once I had a bunch of years of working with my dad, I started to realize like I'm having these issues in my relationships with women. That has to go back to the first woman in my life, you know? And then I started peeling apart what you called the mother wound and what I call in the book the mother wound as well. And yeah, with my mom, I mean, my mom was my best friend as a kid. you know? And my mom was very much there for me in many ways. So it was kind of hard to get to the nuances of that relationship. I think the way that, the way that that really played out in my relationships with women was really through, because again, having a single mom for a bunch of years in my formative years, it was like my mom was my lifeline. Like that was survival, especially with my dad kind of out of the picture. So it was like, I think anytime we orient to something or someone through survival, we're going to shift and morph our personality, our self to be able to, hang on to them. And that's kind of how it worked with my mom is I came out, in my late 30s and early 40s, I came out of this spin of having all these relationships with women where I'm like, oh my God, I've just been kind of, searching for my mom and interacting with women in the same way I did with my mom, which was like, ignoring the fact that I had needs at all. It was all about focusing on her. It was about, is she okay? Orienting to her in that way, attuning to her. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know that was again so many things that you and I think many other men have overlaps and similar experiences. I mean, my dad had left when I was 5 years old, and so I, as an only child, as you say, I was totally dependent on my mother,
Mhm.
and she was very there for me. But the
Yeah.
relationship, as you say, had a funny dual quality. On the one hand, I needed her and she was there for me. On the other hand, as she said, when my father went into the hospital, she needed me to be her brave little man. And I
Yeah.
think many of us, whether we hear those words or we
Mhm.
grow up with that sense that we need to be the man for our mother, we need to be, in some ways, the partner that she didn't have or had lost. And so that
Yeah.
plays out, I know, over the many years as I've been a counselor and a healer and worked with men and their families, helping men and I call it and the women who love them. I mean, you can't help men without helping women, and you can't deal with men's wounds without dealing with women's. It's all part of the package. So maybe talk a little about, I know you've done some counseling and some coaching with
Mhm.
men, and what are some of the things that you've learned about, what your experiences then can help draw other men out to be able to deal with things they're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I think when and you would know this as well, but I think when you hang your shingle out to be a therapist, to be a coach, to be someone that's out there telling a little bit about your story, you tend to attract clients that have a very similar story. So when I got into coaching, I wasn't even necessarily aware of it, but by sharing about my, tenuous relationship with my dad and a little bit about my relationship with my mom, although I hadn't gotten into that as much then. I started to attract all these guys that kind of had similar backstories. So they were men that were, largely struggling with sort of the big two things that I see, which are like, finding my purpose and my calling in life, and then relationships, right? So I mean that those were the big two that I was facing all the time with the guys that I was working with and that I was also living through.
One of the things that I think is very powerful about your book, and why I think it's going to be, something that will be of help both to men and women, because as you know, the title of your book, is "Hating Women," which I think is a a very provocative title and one that stirs up feelings, both as men and as women. And I guess I want to say that although the title is powerful and provocative, it also has a tendency to turn off some people and
Mm.
to say, "Hey, man, I that's not how it is. That's not me. That's not what I've been through."
Yeah.
And maybe you could, say a little bit more about both the provocativeness of the title and really, from my experiences, I've gotten into reading your book. There's a lot more subtle and deep reflections and understandings about men and their issues that maybe don't reflect itself in the title that maybe many people would see and have a reaction to.
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, I have to give credit for the title to my editor, Hannah Park. That's her title. And when we started to get together and talk about this book, something that she felt strongly about was having a title that was gonna get people in the door. Um, and I think today, how many books come out every week, every month, right? So it's like having a title that pops like that. It's especially in our times now, and a lot of the stuff in the news these days is about men and women and their relationships, right? So to have a title like that, I think it helps our cause with this book. Um, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I fought that title. Like I was like, that's not me. There's a lot of heart in this book. So I definitely had my struggles with it, but I
Yeah,
think what it did for me is it allowed me to dig deeper into that question of like, why did I have so much rage towards women? Why did
yeah,
I feel so much frustration in my relationship with women? Um, and so I think it really yielded a deeper inquiry for
yeah,
me, which ended up working out well, I think.
yeah. Well, I think many of us, who've had these complicated losses in our lives, and most of us, I think, consider ourselves good men, and most men are good men, and
Great.
they're good men and good women, but when we're wounded and we're in relationship, I
Mhm.
think that's where some of the wounds come out in rage, in irritability, either turned outward towards a partner or inward on ourselves that, in the most extreme case can lead to death by suicide. So I
Yeah.
think being able to honestly talk about the power of these feelings and these emotions,
Mhm.
and obviously the title of the book speaks to a certain aspect of the anger and the rage that comes out when we feel, we've been violated or we've been wounded, that we
Yeah.
often never allowed ourselves to be able to express. When I was with my mother, I had a lot of anger at what she did and what I needed from her, and same in my adult relationships. So being able to work this through a book like yours, through, as you said, in your coaching, and you talked about in the book, I know it's a very powerful memoir, really, and your own experience, but it also gives people some of the things you learned that you use in your counseling practice, some of the techniques that you found were helpful, that you learned from others and you put into practice. Maybe talk about some of, what some of those tools are that you have learned and used in your own work.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think such a big piece that is missing from boys, young men's lives, right? Specifically in our formative years is like we never learn to work with our own energy or like charge, right? So we've got all this charge that we don't really know what to do with. I think obviously, as your era of men's work used to talk about all the time, it's like we're missing that initiation process that used to teach us how to work with that charge, right? So
Yeah,
now we've got a bunch of guys, we're all walking around and we're like feeling this charge and we're like, what do I do with it? I want to release it, right? I gotta release it. I gotta release it. I gotta release it. And so I think so much of the work that if I look back through the frame of where I sit today, so much of the work that I do with men is like just teaching them how to relate to what's happening inside their body
yeah,
and how to relate to that charge and that fire, which is what I ultimately call it in the book. It's like, yes, that fire can be anger, it's also our life force, right? So like
yeah,
how do you relate to that as it's moving through your body and how do you learn, you asked like what are some of the tools to like how you could work with that, right? I mean, there are a bunch in the book, but I think like the first real skill is like actually being able to turn inward and start to notice that there is this charge moving through me, right? It's life, right? It's
yeah,
life trying to move through me.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that fire, what it brings up for me, another longtime friend and colleague, Sam Keen,
Yes.
wrote a book called Fire in the Belly, where he talked about his own journey of healing. And I still remember, some of the wisdom from that book that I think speaks to both what I've talked about and written about and what you do as well is,
Hmm.
he said when he was at a time of his life where his relationships had fallen apart, he was really at a down place and trying to figure out, so what do I do? How do I get a relation? How do I hold on to a relationship? And
Hmm.
his mentor had said, Sam, and I still remember this because it applied to me and so many men, there's two things that, every man, needs to ask himself. And the
Hmm.
first question is, where am I going? And the
Yeah.
second question is, who will go with me?
Yeah.
And if you get those in the wrong order, you're in trouble. And I
Totally.
think so many of us, got caught up in the looking for the woman or the partner who will go with us, who will be our anchor, our loved one,
Yeah.
before we really tune in with who am I? Where am I going? What's my direction? And I think this is in your book and, in Sam's and so many of the others, Robert Bly and other people, that you've been influenced by and I've been, connected to over the many years. This is a journey that so many of us, I think, are waiting to take and are
Hmm.
looking for, as we found, mentors and guides that can help us, move through these things. So this is, I think, a wonderful just recognition of this collective journey that we're all on. So
Hmm.
maybe talk a little bit, as you've getting towards completion of the book. We'll talk about in a minute, kind of where people can get it, how people can learn about it. But maybe talk a little bit about how the book has changed you and who you are now as a result, both of what you've gone through and then the cathartic and the healing process of writing a book and bringing these things together in a form that you can put out to the world.
I I worked on this book for so long in different forms. So it really changed me a lot over the course of working on it. And I didn't really know what it was until like maybe 4-ish years ago. So I was writing a lot and not sure what I was writing towards. I just knew that there was a story there. And of course, as you said, influenced by some of these other books, influenced by A Fire in the Belly, A Flying Boy, knowing that there was an archetypal journey of some kind going on there for me, but not
Yeah,
knowing how I wanted to kind of present that.
yeah,
Um, and then I got really into this idea of like, okay, well, what's really my deepest wound? And it was definitely my relationships to women and sort of how those relationships have played out. So, yeah, I mean, writing the book last year, the book that people are actually going to get and read next month, when they if they pick it up, is was kind of it was a bit of a it was more of an afterthought in the actual writing process because I'd lived it for so long and I'd worked on all these different versions. So I kind of got to rewrite the book. A lot of the scenes had been written before and I got to just kind of, I feel like, inject some fresh energy into it. And I was, at the course of writing the book last year, I was in a relationship. I was in the second year of a relationship that was the relationship that I'd been in to date. And that relationship also really helped me see some of this stuff in new ways. And I think with her, I was open enough to the point where I could say, okay, I'm really like starting to see more of like I'm really starting to be able to own like my full part of this in a way that maybe
mm,
I hadn't been able to in the past. So I think like where I got to with it, I'm happy with it because I feel like I was able to be like, okay, this is my stuff.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a wonderful feeling, and I've had a similar thing. Obviously, I'm a little older than you. I've have a few more gray hairs, but so many of us at whatever age we are and whatever time of life we are, that being able to deal with these wounds that I think are, part of the society. So many of us have been through them and
Yeah.
haven't dealt with them, and again, on my website, after I talk about uh, the confessions of a twice divorced marriage counselor and some of the problems that I've had, I also
Mhm.
talk about the fact that my wife Carlin and I have been together for 46 years now. So, on the other side of being able to work through these wounds, really can have the kind of long-term, deep, intimate relationships that all of us want.
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage others that are at whatever stage, and it never ends. I mean, she and I are, been together for a long time, but we still work through our own things, and at every stage of whatever age, we still have stuff to do. So before
Mhm.
we end up, you kind of suggest, as I'm aware, that the book, as we're doing this interview, is not quite out yet, but will be. So I'm sure as these interviews go, they get out, and this article will come out probably sometime close to when the book will be coming out. But talk about when the book will be available and both how people can find the book and maybe how people can stay connected with you to know more both about you, your work, and your coaching and whatever else you're currently doing,
Mhm.
and be able to stay in touch with the book as it gets out into the world.
Yeah, sure. The book is out officially July 21st. Simon and Schuster is the publisher, and if you look up the book, if you look up Hating Women, Sean Hotchkiss, it'll pop right up. You can get it anywhere you get books. You can pre-order it now. I don't know when this is coming out, but you can pre-order it now indefinitely, and it'll be out July 21st. The best way to reach me is probably these days just to Google me. I have a Substack, I have an Instagram. I'm
Super.
not big into social media, but yeah, you can find me if you Google my name. I should pop right up.
Super. Well, I'll say as a as published author that if any of this resonates with you at whatever point in the timeline you're hearing about this, if you hear about it before it gets out, pre-ordering is great. Every
Mhm.
author and every publisher loves to know that the book is of interest now. And whenever you find that out, and by the time you get it, you may be able to just go and get it at your local bookstore. But however you get it, Shad, this has really been a delight. I hope we stay in touch and want to thank you for being with me today. And I'm sure we'll have lots to share with each other as time goes on.
Likewise, Jed. Thank you so much. It's always fun to
Indeed.
connect with you.
Good.